My name is Kate Warrens, and I'm 36 years old. I never imagined I'd be slapped across the face by my own father in the middle of my brother's wedding reception. I had just refused to hand over the deed to my penthouse when he struck me. Everyone froze. My brother Julian didn't say a word. Neither did my mother. Tara, his new bride, looked away. I adjusted my dress, looked my father in the eye. "Thanks for the reminder," I said. "I really don't belong here." And I walked out. Before I tell you how everything fell apart and how I took my power back, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Like and subscribe if you believe family loyalty should never come at the cost of your dignity. Let's go back a little. I grew up in a modest 2-story home outside of Chicago. My dad, Robert, worked in finance. My mom, Evelyn, managed part-time at a local florist. From the outside, we looked like a close-knit family. But there were cracks in that picture, ones I didn't fully see until much later. You might think that walking away from your own family, from everything you grew up with, would leave you feeling broken. But for me, that walk out of Julian's wedding didn't feel like a collapse. It felt like release. It felt like breathing air I didn't even know I'd been starving for. After I left the reception, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took off my heels, hailed a cab, and went home to my loft. My home. The place I built with my own hands, my own effort, and every hour I had ever sacrificed to get ahead. Let me show you where I live. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook the city skyline. I keep it quiet, clean, minimalist. There's something comforting about knowing everything in my life is where I placed it, and nothing is about to shift without my permission. On the wall above my fireplace, there's a single framed photo. It's not of my family. It's not of friends. It's an architectural drawing, my first solo project back when I didn't know if anyone would ever take me seriously in this business. But someone did, and then someone else, and eventually I stopped needing permission. Now at 36, I run my own firm. I work with real estate developers, consult for private homeowners, and mentor young designers who remind me of myself just trying to be seen. People think I'm lucky. You've got it all, they say. Success, freedom, no strings attached. And sure, from the outside, that's probably true. But no one sees the weight you carry when your own parents think of you as a backup plan, or worse, an ATM with emotions. The week before the wedding, I was drowning in client meetings and paperwork. But when Mom called and asked if I'd be attending Julian's wedding, I still said yes. I said it without hesitation, because even though the years had built a wall between us, some part of me still wanted to believe we could be family again. I even bought them a gift, a tasteful one. Expensive, but not flashy. That's always been my style, do more, say less. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I told myself it was because of the presentation I had the following Monday or the contractor dispute I was still sorting out. But really, I think deep down I knew something wasn't right. Julian and I used to be close when we were kids. We'd build pillow forts in the living room and sneak cereal into our room on Saturday mornings. But by high school, things had changed. He became the golden child star athlete, charming, easy to praise. I became too serious, too cold W. When Julian, even aft, I wore a I was, but then CA. The three of them, my father, mother, and Julian, pulled me aside before the reception began. I thought they wanted a quick photo, maybe even a rare apology. Instead, I got an ambush. They told me the penthouse was too much for one person, that it would be better used by Julian and Tara, starting their new life. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. Then I realized they weren't smiling. And just like that, the floor beneath me, carefully laid with years of effort, discipline, and self-restraint, started to crack. I stood there staring at them, waiting for the punchline. My father's expression didn't waver. My mother crossed her arms like this was just another negotiation. And Julian, he looked away. "You're not serious," I finally said. My voice was calm. Too calm. Like I was trying to hold on to the last thread of reason in a conversation that had clearly abandoned it. "We are," my mother said flatly. "You live alone. You don't even host guests. What do you need that much space for?" My jaw clenched. "Because I earned it." Julian stepped forward, sheepish. "Look, Katie, we're just thinking about starting a family soon. The penthouse has 2 bedrooms. It's right in the city. It would make a world of difference for us." I looked at him, blinking slowly. "You already live in a luxury condo paid for by Dad. Why don't you start there?" He hesitated. It's not permanent. You know that. I've been trying to save, don't I cut in. Don't pretend this is about practicality. This is about entitlement. Dad's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. My tone? I laughed under my breath. I've been silent for years. I think it's time someone started listening. He stepped closer. I will not be spoken to like that. Then came the sound. A sharp, clean slap. No warning, no build-up. Just the sting of his hand across my face in front of 100 guests under a ceiling, dripping with crystal chandeliers and flowers that cost more than most people's rent. For a second, there was nothing. Not even breath. My face turned, my eyes stayed open. I slowly looked back at him. No tears, no reaction. Just clarity. Thank you, I whispered. He blinked. For what? For reminding me why I left home in the first place. Julian stepped forward. Kate. But I raised a hand. I adjusted the strap on my dress, smoothed the fabric down. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't ask for an apology. I walked away. My heels echoed against the marble floor as I left the ballroom. People parted without a word. No one stopped me. No one dared. Outside, the evening air felt heavy. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like a second skin. The doorman looked confused. I smiled politely and kept walking. I didn't look back. There was no point. Whatever was behind me wasn't home anymore. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address. We rode in silence until he said, "Rough night." I glanced at him in the mirror. "Depends how you look at it." He nodded like he'd heard that kind of answer before. Back at my loft, I kicked off my shoes and walked barefoot across the hardwood floors. The city lights spilled in through the windows like they were reaching just for me. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by quiet, by choices I had made alone for myself. And I felt still. Not peaceful, not yet, but still. Later that night, I opened my laptop and stared at the screen. My inbox was full. Work emails, a few newsletters, one from Julian unread. I hovered over it, then moved it to trash without opening. That's when I noticed the other email, from a name I hadn't seen in years. Marcus Rivera. Subject line, need to talk. It's important. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was crying or replaying the slap over and over in my head. I was wide awake because something inside me had shifted. Something I had buried for years was clawing its way to the surface. By the time the sun came up, I had brewed my third cup of coffee and was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through my financial records. There they were, pages and pages of transactions, loan repayments for Julian's failed startup, tuition top-offs when he ran out of scholarship money, a surprise trip to Mexico for our parents' anniversary, the furnace I paid for when the old one broke down in the middle of winter. No one had ever asked me for those things outright. That's the thing about families like mine. They never beg. They just expect. It starts small. Kate, you're doing so well, we're so proud. Can you help us just this once? We'll pay you back. But the payback never comes. What comes is silence. The assumption that because you could do it, you should do it. That your sacrifices are your duty and your success belongs to everyone else. I sat there and realized I hadn't just been cut from the guest list of a wedding. I had been cut out of the illusion I'd spent my entire adult life trying to buy my way back into. A few days after the wedding, I returned to work like nothing had happened. Deadlines didn't care about family trauma. Clients still needed floor plans and permits approved. But something had changed in the way I walked through my office. I noticed how many times I used to explain myself, apologize, shrink, and I stopped. I started saying no to things that drained me. I handed off minor clients to my junior team. I closed my office door when I needed to focus. I ordered lunch for myself instead of pretending I wasn't hungry. And I went back to my spreadsheets at night, not for work, but for truth. I wanted to know just how much I had given. The number shocked me. In the past 9 years, I had wired over $312,000 to my family in some form or another. Some were labeled as gifts, others loans. Some I hadn't even documented. I had sent money for birthdays, medical bills, house repairs, legal help. Julian's wedding fund alone had drained $20,000 from my savings and I wasn't even invited. That wasn't generosity. That was manipulation hiding behind a smile. The realization didn't make me angry. Not yet. It just made everything quiet. That's the danger of growing up being the strong one. You learn to carry everything without asking who packed the bags. You mistake being needed for being loved. And eventually, you don't even notice how heavy you've become. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my living room with every check stub, every wire transfer, every receipt laid out in front of me. It looked like evidence. Not against them. Against me. Against the version of myself who thought that if she gave enough, proved enough, endured enough, someone would finally say, "You matter." But no one had. And maybe no one ever would. So I folded every document and put them in a box. Then I opened that email from Marcus. I didn't always feel like I was on the outside looking in. When I was a kid, I thought I belonged. I really did. I was the quiet one. The one who read at the dinner table. The one who asked for graph paper instead of a diary. I liked building things, rearranging furniture, drawing floor plans of imaginary castles. Julian liked football and being loud. He broke windows, wrecked bikes, climbed trees too high. He made my parents laugh in ways I never quite knew how to. They called him our little hurricane. I was the calm one, which is a nice way of saying forgettable. It didn't hurt at first. Not really. I told myself I was just different, until the differences started getting punished. At 15, I was offered a place in a summer design program at the university downtown. It was competitive, intense, and only 10 high school students got in that year. I ran home holding the letter like it was gold. My dad barely looked up from the TV. "Is that going to cost me something?" I said. "No." "Full scholarship." My mom raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to do that?" "It sounds isolating." I nodded. She didn't say congratulations. She went back to slicing cucumbers. The following summer, Julian failed 2 classes and needed to repeat a year. My dad bought him a used Jeep to cheer him up, said he needed something to look forward to. I watched the whole thing from the porch. I smiled, I clapped, I stayed quiet. That's what I did best. In college, I worked 3 jobs: tutor, barista, weekend receptionist. I paid for my own textbooks, my housing, my meals. Julian dropped out after 2 years, said college wasn't for him. Guess who moved back in and got the guest room remodeled? When I got my first job at a firm in Chicago, my mother asked me if I could start sending a little each month to help even things out. I said yes, without hesitation. I told myself I was just giving back, but it wasn't giving. It was feeding a system that only worked if I stayed quiet and they stayed comfortable. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment I stopped asking for their approval. It wasn't when I bought my own apartment. It wasn't when I opened my own firm. It was a Tuesday morning 3 years ago. I had just landed my biggest client to date, a landmark historical restoration downtown. I called my parents on the way home, heart-pounding, already imagining how proud they'd be. My mom answered. "That's nice, honey," she said. "Hey, could you Venmo me for the thing I sent you about last week, the wedding deposit for Julian?" I said, "Okay," hung up, and sat there in silence watching the traffic lights cycle through green, yellow, red. They didn't care about what I built. They only cared about what I could hand over. I had convinced myself that was love. But now, with every memory, that illusion was breaking apart like plaster over a cracked wall. Pretty at a glance, but unstable underneath. And the worst part, I let them build it that way. When the world starts slipping sometimes, all you need is a table in the corner, a cup of something warm, and the comfort of knowing no one expects anything from you. That's why I went to Rook and Ivy. Tucked between a flower shop and a second-hand bookstore, it's the kind of place most people walk past without noticing. Dim lighting, mismatched chairs, jazz humming from old speakers. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions. I'd been coming here for years. Through client rejections, heartbreaks, design deadlines. It had become my sanctuary, a place where my silence wasn't seen as cold, but as intentional. I ordered my usual black coffee with a cinnamon stick and settled into the corner booth. I didn't take out my phone. I didn't open my laptop. I just sat. And for the first time in days, I let myself feel it. Not the slap, not the embarrassment, the rage. It didn't show on my face. It never did. But inside it was a slow, low burn, not the kind that exploded. The kind that ate through foundations. How many times had I made excuses for them? They're old-fashioned. They don't understand my work. They show love differently. That was my favorite lie. The one I'd told myself over and over. But now, sitting in that booth with the bitterness of burnt coffee clinging to the roof of my mouth, I wondered, what if they didn't love me at all? What if I was just useful? There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who only see your value in what you can provide. It's like living in a house made of glass. You're visible, but never really touched. The worst part, I'd helped build it. I was the one who picked up the phone at 2 a.m., the one who wired the money without being asked twice, the one who sat through dinners pretending not to notice how my ideas were dismissed before I even finished a sentence. I let it happen because I thought love was earned, that if I just did enough, they'd finally look at me the way they looked at Julian. They never did. I stared out the window watching strangers pass by bundled in scarves and coats, each with a life, a story, a family maybe fractured, maybe not. And then I remembered something. 6 months ago, my father had asked me to look over a lease agreement for one of his new ventures. I'd skimmed it, noticed the name of a holding company I didn't recognize, something with a vague corporate shell and a Cayman Islands address. At the time, I brushed it off, assumed it was just poor business acumen or some tax avoidance trick rich men love to play with. But now I saw it differently. What if it wasn't just bad parenting? What if it was worse? I pulled out my phone and searched my old email archives, found the message, opened the attachment. There it was, Clear Bay Holdings, signed under Robert Warrens. I stared at it like it was a ghost I hadn't realized had been haunting me. A name I hadn't thought about in years floated into my head. Marcus Rivera, finance analyst, old friend, quiet, careful, brilliant. I hadn't seen him in almost 5 years, but somehow he'd emailed me out of the blue just last night. Subject line, "We need to talk. Something doesn't add up." I took one last sip of my cold coffee. Then I stood up. Marcus chose a table near the back of the wine bar. Low light, no music, just the quiet clinking of glassware and the occasional hushed laugh from a booth too far to matter. He looked the same, maybe more tired, a few grays at the temples, but still with that same measured stillness, like he was always 2 steps ahead in a chess game you didn't know had started. When he saw me, he stood. "Kate Warrens," he said, still scaring people with silence. "Only the ones who deserve it," I replied. We hugged briefly. It was the kind of hug you give someone who once knew who you were before you had to explain yourself. We ordered drinks, mine a neat bourbon, his coffee no cream. "So," I said, leaning in, "what's going on?" He slid a USB drive across the table. "You ever heard of Ironwell Construction?" I frowned. "That's one of the companies Dad invested in, years ago. Why?" "It's a shell," Marcus said, "and not even a clever one. Traced the paper trail to a defunct import-export business registered in Panama. Which is funny because Ironwell reports its headquarters in Delaware." I blinked. "So it's fraud?" "It's worse than that," he said. "I think your father's laundering money, and Julian's name is on some of the filings." I sat back. The words didn't shock me. They made sense. A sick, sudden kind of sense, like hearing the answer to a riddle that had been haunting you for years. "I figured it out 2 months ago," Marcus said, "but I couldn't confirm it until I got a hold of a few internal reports from a client who pulled out of a real estate deal last year." I took a slow sip of bourbon. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me?" He hesitated. Then, "Because one of the transactions listed your name. Indirectly. An account tied to a trust you manage." My stomach dropped. "I never authorized that." "I know," he said, "but your name's attached, which means if this thing unravels, you're not just an innocent bystander. You're leverage." I went quiet. Outside the window, a streetcar passed by full of people who had no idea the lives they built might be sitting on sand. I leaned forward. "So what do I do?" "That depends," Marcus said. "You want to take them down or just protect yourself?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought of my penthouse, my firm, my team, the things I'd built with no one's help. I thought of every check I wrote for Julian, every lie I swallowed at family dinners. I want the truth, I said. I don't want revenge. I want a clean line, something they can't cross again. He nodded slowly. Then start documenting everything. Every transaction, every call, every file. I'll help. But Kate, he looked me dead in the eye. You can't unsee this. I nodded. I don't plan to. You don't need to scream to start a war. Sometimes all it takes is a flash drive, a printer, and a closed office door. After that night with Marcus, I didn't sleep much. Again. But this time it wasn't insomnia from pain, it was purpose. And purpose, as it turns out, is an excellent fuel for staying awake. I started with the easy part: emails, contracts, property records, trust fund documents. Anything with my name on it or near it went into a secure folder on a hard drive that never left my apartment. I used encrypted software Marcus recommended. He even loaned me a burner phone. Not because we were doing anything illegal yet, but because the people we were about to corner had no idea they were being watched. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want headlines or handcuffs. I wanted something far more valuable: leverage. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet knowledge that you're 10 steps ahead and no one in the room knows it but you. On Wednesday morning, I printed 3 documents. 1, a notarized list of every asset I legally owned, just in case someone tried to claim otherwise. 2, a summary of transactions tied to Clearbay Holdings with dates, amounts, and beneficiary tags. 3, a typed statement of my own boundaries, conditions, and outcomes, my line in the sand written like a contract. I folded them all into a black leather folder and locked it in my safe. Then I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. That Friday, I got a call from my mother, first one since the wedding. "Hi, honey," she said, like she hadn't stood 3 feet away while I was humiliated. "Can we talk?" I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I was ready. We met at her favorite restaurant. I wore navy, clean lines, simple makeup, no jewelry, the look of someone calm enough to be underestimated. She smiled too much, avoided eye contact. "I wanted to clear the air," she said. "Your father, he overreacted. He's stressed. Julian and Tara, well, they didn't mean to put you in a difficult position." I let her talk. I drank my water. I nodded at the right moments. When she finished, I reached into my bag and slid a sealed envelope across the table. "What's this?" "It's everything I know," I said, "about Clearbay, Ironwell, the trust account tied to my name, and a few offshore transactions I'm not supposed to be aware of." She paled. "I haven't given it to anyone," I added. "Not the IRS, not the press, not yet." She opened her mouth to speak. I held up my hand. "I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here to lay out terms." She didn't move. "You will tell Dad and Julian this. I don't want a cent from them. I don't want their apologies. But if I ever get another phone call, another text, another knock on my door asking for help or money or guilt-tripping me about family, I will release everything. No warnings, no more conversations." She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she only ever knew the version of me that bent, that paid, that showed up. That version no longer existed. I stood up. She reached for my wrist. "Kate, wait. What do you want?" I looked her in the eye. "Peace." And I walked out. They didn't call right away. For the first 48 hours after that lunch with my mother, there was radio silence. No texts, no missed calls, no surprise visits, just quiet. And that told me everything I needed to know. Because people like my father don't go quiet unless they're scared, and people like Julian don't go quiet unless they're being told to. I spent those 2 days working like nothing had changed. Client meetings, site inspections, blueprint revisions. But underneath it all, I was waiting, not anxiously, strategically. Then, on the 3rd day, I got a text. "Julian. Can we meet?" No emojis. No exclamation marks, just flat, cautious text, the digital version of walking on eggshells. I didn't respond immediately. I let him wait 3 hours before replying. Me, tomorrow, 10 a.m., Cafe Rook and Ivy. When he arrived, he looked like he hadn't slept. Julian always had that boyish charm, soft eyes, easy smile, the kind of face that made people assume the best. But not that day. That day, he looked like a man who had finally realized he wasn't bulletproof. He sat down across from me, hands, restless eyes avoiding mine. "Kate, look." I didn't know he started. About any of it. "The companies, the accounts, I swear Dad just asked me to sign a few things, said it was routine." I stirred my coffee. "You signed legal documents without reading them?" I asked. He flinched. I trusted him. He said it was for asset protection, that it would help the family. I leaned back. "Funny, I don't remember being part of that family when I was funding yours." Julian's mouth opened, then closed again. "I'm not blaming you," he said, quieter now, "but we're in deep. Kate, if any of this gets out, Dad could lose everything." I took a sip. "That's not my problem." His eyebrows rose. "He's still your father." "No," I said calmly. "He's a man who raised me and used me. Those aren't always the same thing." He looked genuinely hurt, like it had never occurred to him that I could separate blood from belonging. "We're not asking for money," he added quickly. Tara and I, we're thinking about moving into a new place. Near your building, actually. It has more light, better views. We thought maybe we could start fresh, rebuild." There it was, the soft approach, the appeal to shared history, the fake olive branch wrapped in entitlement. I smiled. Just slightly. Which unit he named it. I already knew, because I'd already bought it. I'd purchased the entire floor of that building 2 weeks ago under a shell corporation managed by my firm's legal advisor. I didn't tell him that. Instead, I nodded. "Nice choice. Great location." Julian relaxed. He thought I was folding, that I was softening, that maybe, just maybe, the Kate he used to manipulate was coming back. He had no idea he was sitting across from someone who had already outmaneuvered him. I let him finish his drink, thanked him for coming, and told him I had to get back to work. As we stood to leave, he placed a hand on my arm. "I mean it, Kate. I want us to be close again, like before." I looked at him for a long time. There was never a before Julian. There was only me showing up, and you expecting it. Then I walked out. And just like that, the war continued, not with threats, not with explosions, but with ownership. 2 days after meeting Julian, the final signature went through. It was done. The entire floor, 3 units including the one Julian and Tara had their eyes on, was now under the control of a holding company I created 6 months ago. I named it Warren Ridge Partners. Not because I cared for the family name, but because it was the only thing they'd never see coming. I didn't buy the properties to be vindictive. I bought them because it was the smartest way to end the cycle. For years I had given. Money, energy, time, silence. And all I ever got in return was the expectation of more. I knew the patterns. Julian would move in. Tara would redecorate with money she didn't earn. They'd throw parties, miss rent, beg for extensions, and eventually someone, probably Mom, would call me and say, "Could you just step in this one last time?" So I bought the building. I didn't renovate. I didn't raise rent. I just waited. Let them walk into comfort without realizing who held the deed beneath their feet. A week after Julian's visit, the agent called. They signed the lease. "They're thrilled," she said, laughing. "Didn't even negotiate the rate." Of course they didn't. People like them never read the fine print. Included in that lease was a clause, a simple one, 30-day termination without cause at the discretion of the owner. I didn't plan to use it right away. That wasn't the point. Power isn't always about action. Sometimes it's just about knowing you could. I sat in my office that afternoon, the city humming below, and reread the contract. My assistant knocked once, then entered. "Package just arrived for you. Hand delivered." I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten card. From Tara. "Kate, thank you. I know this was your doing, this new place. It feels like a fresh start. I hope we can find peace between us. Someday." No signature, no return address. I read it twice. Tara had always been the more intuitive one. She wasn't cruel the way Julian could be, just complicit. She knew how things worked. She played along. But now she was playing something else, a different kind of game. I tucked the card into a drawer and left it there. Peace, I thought, is not something you ask for after years of pretending the bleeding wasn't real. That weekend, I visited the property, not for inspection, just to see it. From across the street, I watched as Julian and Tara carried in boxes, laughing, chatting with neighbors, posing for a quick photo in the hallway. Probably for social media, probably with some caption like "New chapter begins." I watched in silence. There was no pleasure in it, no gloating, just clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had served its purpose. It had kept me alive when love wasn't enough. It had fueled every late-night email, every ledger I poured over, every quiet move I made to protect myself. But now I was past anger. Now I was something else. Detached. Free. Julian looked out the window once toward the street. Toward me. I turned and walked away. He didn't recognize me. Good. He wasn't supposed to. It arrived on a Tuesday, a standard envelope hand-delivered by the building's property manager. No threats, no drama, just a line of legal text beneath the header, "Notice of termination, lease agreement effective in 30 days. Julian called me that night. 3 times. I didn't pick up. On the 4th, he left a voicemail. "Kate, something weird is happening. We just got a notice to vacate the apartment. We don't even know who the landlord is. Can you help us figure this out?" He still didn't get it. Still thought I was the fixer. Still thought I was standing just off stage waiting for my cue to swoop in. I didn't return his call. The next morning, my assistant walked into my office holding a tablet. "You're going to want to see this," she said. Tara had posted on social media. A carefully filtered photo of her sitting cross-legged on the apartment floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, a single orchid in the background. Some people wait their whole lives to feel settled. We felt it in a week. But not everything is as it seems. Being forced out with no explanation is a cruel reminder security is an illusion. The caption was polished, tragic, manipulative. The comments poured in. "Unbelievable. You should sue. Tag your landlord. This is wrong." I watched it all unfold like a play I had written months ago, not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because I needed them to understand something they never had before. Actions have consequences, and silence doesn't mean absence. 2 days later, Julian sent an email. Subject line, "Who owns the building?" I read it, then deleted it. That Friday I got a call from the property manager I had hired under an alias. "Tenants are requesting a meeting," he said. "They want to renegotiate." "Don't," I replied. "Just stick to the contract." There was a long pause on the line. "You're sure I'm sure?" I closed my laptop and stood by the window. From 32 floors up, the city looked soft, blurred, like a painting just before it dries. I thought of all the times I had stood in this same spot, wondering if I'd done enough. If I was enough. Now I no longer asked those questions. The following week, Julian and Tara started packing. No tantrums, no outbursts, just quiet. I knew because I passed by once deliberately, not to gloat, to observe. Tara stood near the elevator holding a lamp awkwardly in both hands. Julian was behind her carrying a box labeled "Kitchen." He didn't see me, but I saw him. And for the first time, I didn't feel small in his presence. I didn't feel like the overlooked sister or the backup plan. I felt like the author of my own story. And I wasn't done writing. It didn't happen all at once. Men like my father don't fall overnight. They unravel in layers. The first crack came in the form of a headline buried on page 6 of a local business journal. "Financial investigation opens into private equity group linked to Warrens & Company." No photos, no interviews, just a short paragraph mentioning potential irregularities in cross-border filings and an ongoing federal review. Most readers skipped it, but I didn't. I read it twice. Then I clipped it and filed it away. A week later, 2 of his longtime clients pulled out of an upcoming deal. One of them, an old-school construction magnate I recognized from family dinners, cited instability and reputational risk as the reason. Another client froze assets until further notice. My father's calendar, once full of meetings and golf appointments, started thinning out. He kept his voice loud on the phone, kept telling people it was a misunderstanding, a political hit job, a vendetta. But something had shifted. He knew it. And so did I. From a distance, I watched it all with a calm detachment, not out of joy, not out of vengeance, just awareness. This was gravity, and he'd built too close to the edge for too long. He tried to call once. Blocked number. I didn't answer. He left no message. I imagined him pacing in his office surrounded by mahogany furniture and framed degrees, wondering when he'd lost control and how it had all slipped through fingers used to snapping and being obeyed. Julian reached out again, too. A text this time. "Dad's in trouble. He won't admit it, but it's getting bad. Can you talk to him?" I read the message under the soft light of my kitchen and set my phone down without replying. I had no interest in rescuing anyone anymore. My silence wasn't cruelty, it was closure. Let them feel the absence of me, the same way I had felt their absence every time they laughed at my work, every time they rolled their eyes at my ambition, every time they needed me but never saw me. A few nights later, I overheard two of my clients discussing the news in passing. "Warrens & Co. I thought they were solid," one said. The other shrugged. "Too many secrets in that circle. You don't lose that many investors in a month, unless someone's been lying." I didn't join the conversation, didn't smile, didn't flinch. I simply sipped my drink and let the world do what it does best, reveal. My mother called 3 days after that. Private number. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was brittle. "Kate, he's not sleeping. He's not eating. He's afraid of going to jail. He says someone set him up. I told him maybe you knew something. Can you please talk to him?" I didn't return the call. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my windows to let the fall air in, and turned on a jazz record I hadn't played in years. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. This was never about making anyone suffer. It was about making sure I never had to suffer for them again. They had built their kingdom on silence. Now they could live in mine. It was a Tuesday afternoon when he showed up. No warning, no call, just a knock on the glass door of my firm's reception area. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, like life had been folding him inward. My assistant gave me a quiet look, one I understood instantly. I nodded. He stepped into my office like he didn't belong there. For the first time in my life, he looked out of place. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. He stood. I stayed seated. He glanced around, taking in the sleek interior, the awards on the wall, the shelves of architectural journals. "You've done well," he said. I waited. He sat down slowly, as if the chair might reject him. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Not the way a father looks at his daughter. The way a man looks at someone who used to be under his thumb and no longer is. "I wanted to see you," he said quietly. I didn't respond. "I know what you've done." My heartbeat didn't change. I met his gaze and said nothing. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them. "I never thought it would get this far. Never imagined it'd be you who—" He trailed off. The words hung in the air like fog. I finally spoke. "I didn't expose you." He nodded. "I know. But you could have." Silence settled again, thick and electric. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I wasn't a good father to you." Still, I said nothing. I thought providing was enough. I thought if I gave you the tools, you'd build something, and that would be our bond, our pride. I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't give me tools. You gave me obstacles." He looked away. "And yet," I continued, "I still built something. Not because of you. In spite of you." He didn't argue. That more than anything surprised me. He let out a breath. "I've lost everything. My clients, my partners. Even Julian won't talk to me now. Says I brought it on myself." He looked back at me, eyes red but dry. "I just wanted you to know. I regret it. All of it." I studied his face. The man who once slapped me in public. The man who told me I was difficult, too serious, too much. Now, sitting across from me with nothing left but words. I believed he regretted it. But I didn't need that anymore. Regret doesn't rebuild what you broke, I said. He nodded again. I know. He stood. There was no desperation in his body, no begging in his voice, only defeat. He walked to the door, paused, then turned. You're stronger than I ever was. I looked at him. No, I said. I just stopped needing permission. He opened the door. The hallway light spilled in, cutting across the floor like a line neither of us would ever cross again. And then he left. No goodbye. No closure. Just an ending. The kind that doesn't echo. Just settles. That Friday night, the dining table was full. Not with family. With people who had chosen me. Who saw me. Who stayed. There was Marcus, of course, leaning back in his chair with a glass of wine and that same thoughtful half-smile he always wore. My project manager, Lizette, who had been with me since the first draft table I set up in my studio apartment. Evan and Riley, friends who had no idea what I'd been through, but who never made me feel like I had to earn space in their lives. The food wasn't fancy. A simple roast chicken, garlic potatoes, wine someone else brought. There was laughter stories, music playing low in the background. Someone spilled sauce on the rug. No one cared. And for once, I wasn't performing. I wasn't hosting to impress. I wasn't curating a version of myself to prove I was enough. I was just there. Present. Alive in a space that I had built not out of pain, but out of purpose. The penthouse was warm. Not because of the lighting or the fireplace or the view, but because I had filled it with people who didn't need me to sacrifice parts of myself to be loved. At one point, Marcus caught my eye across the table. He raised his glass slightly. To peace, he said. I clinked mine against his. To earned peace, I replied. Everyone smiled, not fully knowing the weight behind those words. But I did. I looked around and realized something. This was the family I had built. Not by blood, but by choice. Not through obligation, through alignment. And the irony, it was stronger than the one I was born into. After dessert, people lingered. No one rushed out. The night stretched the way good ones do, unhurried, unwatched. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the last guest left, I stood by the window with a cup of tea and looked out over the city. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like something I had to conquer. It felt like home. There was no voice in my head reminding me of what I hadn't done, who I hadn't pleased, what I should be striving for. Just quiet. Not the kind of quiet that's empty, the kind that's earned. I thought back to the girl I used to be, the one who stayed late to solve other people's problems, who overcompensated to be seen, who bit her tongue when it bled because someone told her she was too much. She would have set the table and sat alone waiting. Now she no longer had to wait. She had become me. I turned off the lights one by one and let the room go dark, but inside I was bright. The next morning, the knock on my door was softer than usual, almost polite. I opened it to find my mother standing in the hallway, hair neatly pulled back. A scarf I remembered from years ago, one she used to wear on holidays when she still tried. Her face was blank, but her eyes were cautious, like she wasn't sure who'd answer. "Hi," she said. "Hi." We stood there a moment. She held a small paper bag in her hands. "I brought those pastries you used to like. From Beaumont's." I nodded. "They still make them." She smiled faintly. "Only on weekends." I stepped aside. She entered like someone walking into a museum, slow, careful not to touch anything. She sat at the kitchen island while I made coffee. It was quiet, familiar and foreign all at once. I placed the cup in front of her. "Thanks," she said. I waited. She looked around. "This place is beautiful," she said. "It feels peaceful." "It is," I replied. She took a sip. "Then finally, I saw your father. I didn't answer. He's not doing well. You probably already know that." Still, I said nothing. "He blames himself, but he also doesn't know what to do with that." I nodded once, just enough to be polite. She watched me closely. I think he expected you'd come back eventually. You always did. I looked her in the eye. Not this time. She nodded slowly. I know. Silence stretched between us. I wasn't kind to you, she said, not in the ways that mattered. Now I let the silence do its work. She filled it. I didn't protect you. I didn't stop him. And I told myself it was normal, that you were strong, that you didn't need it. I folded my hands in my lap, calm, present, listening not for her sake but for mine. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, but I miss you. I exhaled. I believe you. Her eyes lit slightly. You do? Yes, I said. But I don't need to rebuild something that never had a foundation. She blinked. I don't hate you, I added, but I'm not coming back to that version of us. I've worked too hard to find peace. Tears welled up, but she didn't let them fall. I don't know how to fix it, she whispered. You don't have to, I said gently. You just have to leave it where it is. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Then she nodded. I should go. I walked her to the door. She turned once before leaving. You really are better off without us, aren't you? I didn't answer. She left quietly. And this time I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. It was almost midnight. The city below pulsed in rhythm traffic lights blinking red and gold, apartment windows glowing like constellations. I stepped out onto the balcony barefoot, a glass of water in my hand, the cool tile grounding me to this exact moment. I'd stood here before, many times. Some nights it was after 18-hour workdays running on espresso and adrenaline. Other nights I stood here and wondered why building something from nothing still left me feeling invisible. But tonight felt different, not because of what had happened, but because of what no longer had power over me. Behind me, the apartment was quiet. No voices, no tension hiding in the corners, no expectation of a call, a crisis, a knock on the door demanding my help. Just silence, not empty, full. I thought about my father. I didn't hate him. Hate requires energy, attention, a desire to punish. I felt none of that. He was simply done. In my world, at least. The version of me who waited for an apology was gone. She had done enough. Now it was my turn to live without explanation, without defense, without guilt. I thought about my mother. I believed her when she said she missed me. But belief isn't enough. It doesn't erase the years I swallowed my voice so someone else could be comfortable. It doesn't repair the nights I cried myself to sleep while she looked the other way. I loved her, in the way children love what is familiar, but I didn't owe her my peace. And Julian, I smiled faintly. Some people never change. Some people don't even know they need to. He would find another apartment, another favor to call in, another hand to hold while he stumbled forward, still thinking the world would clean up after him. But it wouldn't be me. Not anymore. I took a sip of water. The wind was soft, brushing against my arms like a quiet reassurance. The truth is, I never wanted revenge. What I wanted was space, room to breathe, to rebuild, to remember that I was never broken, just buried under the expectations of people who mistook my silence for consent. And now I was above it all, literally and figuratively. From 32 floors up, the noise of the city became music. From this height, even my past looked smaller. I closed my eyes. If I could speak to the younger version of myself, the girl who kept receipts in case she had to prove she mattered, who dimmed her light so others could feel bigger, I'd tell her this: you're not too much. You were just surrounded by people who asked for less, and your freedom won't come wrapped in forgiveness or reunion dinners or letters that arrive too late. It will come in the shape of your own boundaries, in the way your voice stops shaking when you say no, in the peace of your own home filled with people who love you because of your fire, not despite it. I opened my eyes. The skyline stretched far, wide, endless. Possibility, not punishment. A life not waiting to be earned, but to be lived. I whispered to myself, not a prayer, not a promise, just a truth: I'm still here. But I'm not hers anymore. Or his, or theirs. I'm mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to look back. Just forward. Always forward. 6 months later, the air felt different. It wasn't the change in season, though the spring light did seem softer. It wasn't the new furniture in my office or the expanding client list that filled my calendar. It was me. I had stopped reacting. For so long, I measured my worth by what I resisted, what I endured, what I overcame. But now my worth was just there. Unapologetic. Unperformed. Undeniable. I woke up before the alarm, drank my coffee without scrolling, read a book for no other reason than the joy of reading. Some days I walked through the city with no destination just to remind myself I didn't owe my time to anyone. My assistant Julia noticed. "You're quieter these days," she said once, handing me a file. I smiled. "That's because there's no one left in my head arguing with me." She didn't ask questions. She didn't have to. People who've seen the storm understand the stillness. I had moved beyond anger, beyond grief. Now I was in something new. Clarity. The kind that lets you sit alone at a restaurant and not check your phone once. The kind that lets you hear your own voice above everyone else's expectations. One afternoon, I got a message from a former colleague, someone who once underestimated me publicly, then quietly asked me for help behind closed doors. He wanted to meet, said he had a collaboration idea. I declined. No explanation, no guilt, just "thank you for thinking of me. I'm unavailable." The power of that sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. I used to feel obligated to soften every boundary, to coat every refusal with sugar so no one thought I was difficult. Now I let the sentence land as it was, sharp, simple, whole. That weekend I hosted another dinner, nothing extravagant, a few close friends, a shared bottle of wine music low in the background. We talked about architecture, about films we loved, about the little things that made us feel like we were still growing. No one asked about my father. No one brought up the past. And I didn't volunteer it. Not because I was hiding anything, because it simply wasn't who I was anymore. I didn't need to tell that story again. I had already lived it, and survived it, and rewritten it. After everyone left, I stood by the window, my usual spot, and watched the night fold over the city. This time there was no monologue in my mind, no internal debate, just quiet presence. That's the thing about healing no one tells you. It's not loud, it's not cinematic, it's subtle. It's the breath you didn't realize you were holding finally releasing without resistance. It's the absence of pain in places you forgot were hurting. It's peace, not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology, not a call, not a moment of recognition. I had everything I needed, not in things, in boundaries, in knowing I could say no and mean it, in knowing I could say yes and not regret it. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't survival. This was living. Finally. The idea had been sitting in the back of my mind for months. Quiet, persistent, like a melody you can't name but hum anyway. At first I ignored it, told myself it was too much, too risky, too soon. But the thought kept returning. What if I stopped designing for other people's visions? What if I finally built something that was mine, completely mine? I had spent a decade building other people's dreams, bringing to life their penthouses, their hotels, their showrooms. I was good at it. My portfolio spoke for itself. But none of it carried my name. None of it told my story. So I ran the numbers. Quietly, privately. I started sketching again, not on corporate templates, but in the blank pages of a leather journal I hadn't touched in years. I found myself staying late at the office again, but not out of pressure, out of purpose. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even Marcus, not because I was hiding it, because it felt sacred, my own hands, my own space, my own timeline. One morning I visited an old Art Deco building on the edge of town. The facade was crumbling, the inside gutted, forgotten by time, and ignored by investors. I saw possibility, not just in the architecture, in myself. The realtor looked skeptical. "You sure about this?" "It's a lot of work." I smiled. "So am I." I signed the papers that afternoon. It was official. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just restoring a structure, I was reclaiming a voice. A few weeks later, I called a meeting with my team. 10 people around the table, all eyes on me. "I'm launching a side project," I said. "It's personal. It won't interfere with client work, but I want full autonomy." Julia smiled. "You mean it's yours?" I nodded. "All mine." They didn't ask why. They just asked how to help. That was the beauty of choosing your circle. They don't demand justification for your joy. The design came together slowly. I didn't rush it. I let it breathe. Every beam, every brick, every light fixture was chosen with intention. I named it the Violet House, not for a person, but for a memory. A tiny violet plant I kept in college, the only living thing in my room during those hard years. I used to water it while whispering things I couldn't say out loud. "You'll make it. You'll be okay. You are enough." Now, years later, I was building a space around that belief, a creative residency, a space for women rebuilding, for architects, writers, designers, anyone who had to claw their way back to themselves and needed a place to start again. Not therapy, not charity, just permission. To rest, to build, to be. I didn't advertise it widely, just placed a quiet announcement online. 300 applications came in within the first week. I sat alone one night, scrolling through the stories. Survivors of divorce, financial ruin, generational trauma. And they all wanted the same thing, a room of their own. I ran my fingers along the windowsill of my penthouse, thinking how far I'd come from being a girl who wasn't even allowed to keep her own apartment. Now I owned the walls and what happened inside them. I wasn't rebuilding from pain anymore. I was building from peace, and that made all the difference. The Violet House opened on a quiet morning in May. No ribbon cutting, no press release, just an unlocked door, sunlight on the floor, and a welcome mat that said, "You're safe here." The first resident was a woman named Celia, mid-30s, former architect. She'd spent the last 2 years recovering from a divorce that stripped her of her home, her confidence, and almost her career. She walked in holding a single suitcase and a sketch pad. She barely spoke at first, but by the 3rd day, she was sketching in the garden. By the 2nd week, she had pinned blueprints to the corkboard in the shared studio. By the end of the month, she asked me to review her portfolio. "It's not ready," she said. I flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately. "It doesn't have to be," I replied. "You are." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. That was the thing about this house. It didn't force healing. It held space for it. Over the next 3 months, the rooms filled. A poet in her 60s who had raised 4 children and forgotten how to write for herself. A young painter with a past full of scars and a future full of color. A chef who had lost her restaurant in a flood and her sense of self along with it. They came quietly. But they didn't stay that way. The walls that once echoed now sang with creation, music, laughter, solitude that didn't ache anymore. And through it all, I remained steady. Not above them, among them. I wasn't their leader. I was simply someone who knew what it felt like to need a door that didn't slam, a voice that didn't shout, and a room that didn't require explanation. One afternoon, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea while the wind moved gently through the trees. Celia sat beside me, barefoot legs curled under her. "You know, she said you saved my life." I shook my head softly. "No," I said. "You saved your life. I just left the light on." She smiled. That night, I walked through the house after everyone had gone to bed. The living room was filled with half-finished canvases and pages of poetry. The kitchen smelled like ginger and citrus. The walls breathed like they were alive. I paused in the doorway of the last guest room. It was empty for now, but not for long. There would always be someone who needed a place to remember who they were before the world told them to shrink. And this house would be waiting, because I had made it not as a monument to what I survived, but as proof that survival could be beautiful, that strength didn't have to roar. Sometimes it just looked like an open door. There was no parade, no grand moment where the music swelled and the credits rolled, just a Tuesday. I woke up before the sun barefoot in the kitchen, listening to the sound of the kettle whistle. The morning light touched the marble countertop, and I stood there for a full minute, doing nothing but breathing. That was the thing about peace. It didn't announce itself. It crept in softly, showing up in the spaces where fear used to live. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. For the first time, my days weren't about proving anything. I wasn't hustling for a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own, and the chairs around it reserved only for those who honored it. That morning, I walked down to the Violet House. The hallway smelled like rosemary and lemon oil. In the studio, Celia was already painting. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. That was the beauty of this place. Everyone was seen without explanation. I made tea, sat in the corner chair, and opened a notebook. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Outside, the wind rustled the ivy on the stone walls. Inside, there was no tension, no armor, just quiet intention. And I realized something. This gentle present life was everything I once thought I had to fight for. Now it was just mine. There were no calls from my family, no unexpected messages. The silence wasn't cold. It was clean, a boundary honored, a weight lifted, a life redefined. I used to think healing was something you achieved. Now I knew better. Healing is what happens when you stop chasing the life they told you to want and start living the one that feels like your own. If you had asked me years ago what strength looked like, I would have said it was loud. I would have said it was fighting back, standing tall, proving them wrong. But now I know strength can be quiet. It can be walking away from people you once begged to see you. It can be choosing silence over argument, peace over validation. It's knowing you don't owe anyone an explanation for the life that makes you feel whole. I used to think I needed to be everything successful, likable, unshakable, but I was wrong. I only needed to be free. Free from expectations that shrank me. Free from the need to be chosen by people who never truly saw me. Free from the version of myself I created just to survive. I no longer carry the stories they wrote about me. I write my own now, in softer tones, in bolder lines, in rooms where my voice is not just heard but welcomed. I don't need revenge. I don't need closure. What I needed was space, and I gave it to myself. Now I live in a rhythm that's mine. I laugh without apology. I rest without guilt. I create not to prove I exist, but because I do. There's no finish line to healing, no checklist to happiness, only moments. Real, ordinary moments that feel like truth. And if you're listening to this wondering when it's your turn to breathe, know this. You don't need their permission. You never did. The life you want isn't waiting at the end of the fight. It's waiting at the end of letting go. The elevator doors slid open to the rooftop. I stepped out slowly barefoot, the soft stone warm beneath my feet from the sun. The city stretched endlessly below, a living thing made of movement and light. Behind me, the Violet House stood still, quiet, glowing from within. Ahead of me, just sky. I walked to the edge and stood there, not to escape, not to rise above, but to look out with a new gaze, one not shaped by fear, but by freedom. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore, not for approval, not for recognition. Everything I needed was already here in my voice, my body, my choices, my breath. I closed my eyes and felt the wind move through me, not as resistance, as reminder that I was here, that I had made it, not untouched, but unbroken, and finally unbound. You don't have to inherit their pain. You don't have to carry what never belonged to you. You can choose peace. You can choose boundaries. You can choose you. You don't have to explain your healing. You only have to live it. This is your sign to stop asking for permission to live free. Start writing your own story today. True freedom comes when you stop living to please others and live to respect yourself. Put down the burdens that are not yours. Step into the peace you deserve. And if this story touches you, share it. Because someone else needs an open door too.